Here on Daf Chafhei with Beis, approximately, I would say, about 15, 20 lines down from the top, where we left off. Ki noch nafshei de Ravina, when Ravina died, Pasach alea hu saftana, one of the experts at delivering hespedim, said the following beautiful hesped. Tmarim he knew rosh. He knew lahania miloshan nanuim means that the palm tree should wave rush, the tops of your trees. Al tzadik katomar, for a righteous person. And he's basically rephrasing the capital number tzadi beis in Tehillim, tzadik katomar yifrach ke'eres balvanon yisgeh. And he's choosing this because the palm tree is a metaphor for a righteous person. Nasim leilos kiyamim, our nights should be like days, continuous kinos, lamentations, sobbing and crying on the loss. Al mesim leilos kiyamim, for Ravina, who made his nights like days in dedicating them totally, exclusively to Torah study. Shifchi kamayim libech. Amalei Ravashi lebar kipok. Very strange interchange. Hahu Yoma, my Amrit, on that day when I die, what will you say? He wanted to know, Ravashi wanted to hear his own eulogy. Amalei, Rav Kipok replied, here's Amina what I would say. Im ba'arozim nafla shalheves, a flame has fallen on the cedar trees. The cedar trees represent the highest level of Torah, righteousness, of tzidkus and Torah. And now they've been set afire by the flame. Mayasu ezove kir. What should we say to the hyssopes? These are the low shrubs of Klal Yisrael, the rank and file people. If the flame is able to burn the arazim, how much more so do we have to be afraid of what it might do to the hyssops, to the lower people on the echelon? Livyasan bechaka hoalo. A great fish called the livyasan has been brought up from the bottom of the sea with a fish hook. It wasn't aware of the fact. So this is the Malach HaMavis taking the life of Ravashi, the great livyasan. Mayasu degay rikak. What do we say to the smaller fish? How much more so will they be taken up from the sea? B'nachal shotef nafla chaka. We can understand Ravashi as a nachal shotef. He is a river that flows, that rushes. And now chaka, it became dried up. Mayasu, what should we say? May gave him to those who are symbolically, metaphorically represented by the small ponds that'll certainly dry up. And basically the eulogy is a eulogy about sadness, because if the Malach HaMavis and if the Midas Hadin was able to take the righteous, how much more so the lowliest of plants, in the case of the hyssop, the lowliest of fish or ponds. And therefore we have to be overwhelmed by fear of the Midas Hadin. And this eulogy of Rav Kippur was not beyond criticism. Amalei Bar Oven criticized this eulogy. Chas v'shalom, you want to use a terminology like shalheves, like a fire burning up tzaddikim, or the chaka, or you want to talk about the dryness of the rushing river of the tzaddik. You want to talk about a fish hook that is taking a tzaddik, a livyasan, out of the water. That's not the way we talk about a tzaddik. These are terms like flames that have connotations of Gehenna, or the fish hook is indicative of a very evil kind of a death when a small hook captures a great fish. These are not appropriate references when we talk about a tzaddik. Umay Amrit, so Rav Kipak said, and let's hear your better, improved eulogy. You know, criticism is easy, but let's see what you can do. And Barovin said, Amina, here's what I would say. Bechu liavelim. Cry for those who mourn the loss of Ravashi. V'lo la'aveda. And what is this aveda, this lost object? This is a metaphor for the soul, the lost soul of Rav Ashi that's been taken away from us. Shehi l'menucha. But you know what? Don't cry for the lost soul. Don't cry for Rav Ashi. He's fine. Cry for the Avelim who no longer have access to the Torah and the inspirational teachings of Rav Ashi. But as far as the soul of Rav Ashi, that's not avda, that's not lost. That's not burnt up in flames or taken up by a fishhook from the water. He l'menucha. That's where he gets his peace in Gan Eden. The Adol Anach, but we mourners have to sigh. We never lost the great sage, the great teachings of Rav Ashi. And the Gemara says that when Rav Ashi heard these two eulogies, Cholash Taiti Alehu, he became depressed about them. He was really unhappy with them. These were inappropriate eulogies to describe his soul, even in a metaphor, as a lost object, or to talk about is the flame that it's just is hapach kare. As a result, these two maspidim were punished. How were they punished? Both Rav Kipok and Bar Ovin is hapuch karayu. Some of the feet became twisted around, almost as if the foot would go upwards instead of flat on the ground. And Ahu Yoma, on that day that Rav Ashi actually passed away, lo asul aspude, they didn't come to eulogize Rav Ashi. Since they had been punished because their eulogy was not up to par, it wasn't proper for Rav Ashi, that caused him great stress, and therefore they were punished. And now they were handicapped, they couldn't come and stand and eulogize anyone, let alone someone as great as Rav Ashi. Behind the Yomer Rav Ashi, lo bar kipok, cholitz v'lo bar oven cholitz. Neither bar kipok nor bar oven would be able to perform a kosher chalitza, because in chalitza, the requirement is that the foot has to be straight and normal. A foot that's inverted is pasul chalitza. The Torah says, "V'cholza nalo me'al raglo," excluding the case where the removal of the shoe must be done from beneath the foot. If the foot is inverted, it's not going to be me'al raglo. Rava Kihavi also Biglas, he came to a river called Biglas. Amarle Bar Oven, he talks to Bar Oven, he says, Kum Ema Milsa. Pray on my behalf because I'm about to cross this river and it's very dangerous. Pray on behalf of my safety. Kaivi Amar Bar Oven got up and he said the following. Again, this Maisa took place earlier than the other Maisa. Bo Rov Shlishis B'mayim. He describes Rava as Rov of the Shlishis. So now we have to understand what Shlishis. Shlishis is a reference to Klal Yisrael, because Yeshayahu Navi calls Klal Yisrael Shishis. And Rava is Rov. He's considered equal to the majority of the nation of Israel. And now he's coming into the water. Zechar, God, please remember him. Verachim, and have mercy on him. Ta'inu me'acharecha ki isha mibayla. If we have strayed away from you like a wife was rebellious against her husband, and she strayed from her husband with another relationship, she became a sota. Al taznichenu yos mimara. Do not forsake us with the sign of bitter waters. The waters, if they would be dangerous, they are like and can be compared to the bitter waters that the sota has to drink. So if the people of Israel are in a state of sin and they're compared, like in Yirmiyah Navi, Yechezkel Navi, to a straying wife, the Torah decrees that a suspected adulteress, a sota, has to drink the bitter waters. And Bar Oven prayed that despite the fact that Klal Yisrael might have had guilty iniquities, God should not harm them through the waters of the Tigris. And this was his prayer on behalf of the protection of Rava. Now here we have a mnemonic device that gives you the listed names of those great Talmidei Chacham whose deaths will be mentioned. Rabbi Chanin Chasnei de Beit Nasi Avi was the son-in-law of the Nasi. He was married to the Nasi's daughter. Loka Havile B'nei. He didn't have any children. Boy Rachmei. Rav Chanin prayed on behalf of he and his wife. V'havile, and they had a child. But Ahu Yoma, on the very day the child was born, Nach Nafshe, Rav Chanin passed away. He did not live to raise his own child, his single child. And one of the outstanding people who gave eulogies stood over Rav Chanin and recited the following eulogy: Simcha l'tuga nefacha, gladness and happiness has been turned to sorrow. Sason v'yagon nidbaku, we have a connection, an overlap of both sason of joy and yagon and depression and sadness. V'eis simchaso, on the very day of his gladness, when he, Rav Chanin, had a child, finally, Nenach, there's a sigh of mourning, a sigh of death. Rav Chanin should have rejoiced at the son, the birth of a son that he so longed for, but instead he sighed in the knowledge that he would not be zochet to raise this child. V'eis chaninaso avid chanino, when the child was given life, that's chanina chen from Hashem, then the one who sought favor for him was lost, and that's his father Rav Chanin. Asikule Chanan al Shmei, the child was named Chanan after his father. Kinach nafshei de Rabbi Yochanan, when Rabbi Yochanan died, Pasach alei Rabbi Yitzchak Rabbi Lazar, he opened up with the following hesped: Kasha hayom li Yisrael ki yom bo hashemesh b'tzarayim. This day is the difficult day, a sad day for the Jewish people, like the sun beginning to set at midday. The Chsiv v'aya bayom ahu v'yvesi hashemesh b'tzarayim. And the pasuk in Amos speaks about the sun being pointing towards the west to set at midday. Omar Rabbi Yochanan, Zeh Yomo Shel Yoshio, that the prophecy of Amos is related to Yoshio HaNavi, who is a great tzaddik who uprooted, to a large extent, not completely, Avodah Zarah from Israel, and yet he tragically was killed by the army of Necho, of Aro Necho. He was 39 years old. And Rabbi Yochanan declares that this nevuah of Amos, about the setting of the sun at midday, refers to the death, the premature death of Yoshio, the great tzaddik, in his prime, the prime of his life. Yoshio is called the sun. And with his death, the Maspid says that this day is as awful as the day in which the sun set at midday. The devastating loss at the passing of King Melech Yoshio at this time. Inach nafshei de Rabbi Yochanan, Yosiv Rabbi Ami Shiva Ushloshim. His Talmud Muvak, Rabbi Ami, observed both Shiva and Shloshim. Omar Rabbi Abba Bered Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Ami di Ovid legarme hu di Ovid. In other words, we don't have anyone who paskins like this halacha that this morning of both Shiva and Shloshim for one's Rebbe. It's only Rav Ami who did it legarme hu di Ovid, based on his own personal opinion. No one else accepted his ruling. The Hachi Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Here's the statement of Rabbi Chia, the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Afilu Rabo Shalimdo Chachma in Yoshavel of Eliom Echad. There's only one day of mourning, even for a Rebbe who taught him most of his wisdom. It's his Rebbe Muvak. His primary teacher, he taught him the bulk of his Torah, or perhaps the Derech HaLimud, he taught him the method to study Torah, to analyze its concepts, and is only maximum one day of Avelus. Ki noch nafshi de Reb Zera, when Reb Zera passed from this world, Pasach Alehu Tzavtana, one of the eulogists, recited the following eulogy, Eretz Shinar, which is a reference to Bavel, Hara, V'yolda, it conceived and bore Rabbi Zera, Eretz Tzvi, Eretz Yisrael, which is called Eretz Tzvi, Gidla Shashuel. What does that mean? Gidla Shashuel, raised its delights. And here we have a comment of, I'm not sure who says it. Anyway, the delights of Babylonia. Rav Zera was born in Bavel. That's where he studied by Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda. Then he moved and he made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. He became great. He received smicha. He's sometimes called Rav Zera when he's in Bavel. Sometimes he's called Rebbe Zera after receiving smicha in Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi Zera died in the city of Tiberia. Oilanu, Oinala, Amra, Rakas. Rakas is another name for Tiberia. Woe to her, says Tiberia. Ki avda klichem dasa. She lost the most precious soul in the death of Rabbi Zera, who died in Tiberia. Oy na la. That is a pasuk in Sefer Kinos, in Eicha, where it says, Nafla ateres roshenu oy na lanu kichatanu. And the concept of kli chemda, a precious instrument, is appropriate for Reb Zera, who personified the Torah. Ki nach nafshei de Rabbi Avo, when Rabbi Avo passed away, Achisu amude de Kesre Maya, the pillars of Caesarea shed water. In other words, metaphorically, they cried. These were tears of mourning over the loss of Rabbi Avo. And there's moisture that comes out of the pillars that symbolizes the loss that was so great that even the stones shed tears. And it means that the entire universe is impacted, even inanimate elements in the universe, by the loss of a great tzaddik. Rabbi Yossi, when Rabbi Yossi passed away, Shafu Marzave de Tzipori Maya. Right, they used to have on the top of the roofs gutters that would take the rainwater out so it wouldn't flood the house. And now we're talking about Dama. Instead of mayim that used to spout forth from these gutters, it was blood. And what this means is that the blood was symbolic of the fact that Rabbi Yossi had fearlessly championed the mitzvah of Milah even during the Shmad of Rome, when Milah was prohibited at the pain of death. The Rabbi Yaakov, when Rabbi Yaakov passed away, Ischamiu kochave biyamama. The stars were visible during the day. Nature itself was transformed by the pain and the suffering and the mourning over the loss of Rabbi Yaakov. During the daytime, sunlight normally prevents the stars from being seen. They're only visible at night. But they became visible by day upon the death of Rabbi Yaakov, which symbolizes the sun setting at midday, the great luminary. Rabbi Yaakov had passed away. The world would from now on be enlightened only by lesser sages. The Rabbi Asi, when Rav Asi passed away, I akru kol ilanaya. All the trees were uprooted. There was a storm in the town of Rav Asi that destroyed all the trees, indicative of the Sa'arav, the tempest of God, which caused the death of Rav Asi. To Reb Chia, when Reb Chia passed away, Nechisu kipe denura merkia, fiery stones descended from the sky. When Rabbi Nachman, Rabbi Yossi, or Rabbi Simoy died, Ishta'u Salmonayayu V'ahavu Lemechtzalayu. There were images of idols that were graven onto coins, and they became flat like slabs because the images of the saintly tzaddikim who had deceased, now those images were dimmed upon the death of Rabbi Tanchum, of Rabbi Menachem Reb Simoy. To Rabbi Tanchum bar Chia, when Rabbi Tanchum passed away, is Katzatzu Kol Andartia. The monuments of all the deceased kings were cut down. These were monuments that were worshipped as idols, and in the merit of the deceased tzaddik. This miracle occurred, and the monuments were cut down. To Rabbi Eliashiv, when Rabbi Yosef passed away, Ichatru Shivin Maktarasa Binarda, 70 burglaries were perpetrated in Narda. So during his lifetime, Rabbi Eliashiv had merited to protect the inhabitants of his town from crime. But with his death, the criminals rose up and perpetrated their crimes. The Rav Hamnuna, when Rav Hamnuna passed away, Nechisu Kefe Debarda Merikia, hailstones came flowing down from the sky. And this, God brought about this terrible calamity to demonstrate his distress, Kaviyachal, over the death of the tzaddik. The Rav of Rabbi Yosef, when Rabbi Yosef passed away, Noshuk Kipe de Pras Adodi. The supporting arches of the bridges that connected the land on one side of the Euphrates River, Nahar Pras, to the other side, they broke down, they touched each other. And this should be understood in the following context. There was a representative of this breakdown of the bridges was representative of the world's instability as a result of the death of these two stages. Rabbi and Rav Yosef were chaverim, were colleagues. Each one at one point headed the yeshiva Pumbedisa, which is situated on the banks of the Nahar Pras, the Euphrates. Rav Yosef died 2.5 years later than Rabbi. But here it means that this incident occurred when Rabbi passed away. The Abai v'Rava, when Abai v'Rava passed away, Noshuk Kipe the Diglas Adadi, the arches of the bridges over Nahar Tigras broke and touched each other. Abai was the head of the yeshiva Pumbedisa after Rav Yosef passed away. When Abai died, the Talmidim relocated to Mechoza, which was the city of Rava. And since Mechoza was situated on the banks of the Tigris River, when the era of these sages ended, the Tigris River was shooken up. Kinach Nafshe de Rav Mesharshia, when Rav Mesharshia passed away, Ta'ud Dikle shitze, the palm trees produce thorns, signifying that until then the crops had grown favorably in the merit of Rav Sharshia. And this leads us to Taner Rabbanon, the Brisa, which is quoted on Daf Chavav Amud Aleph, in connection with the Mishnah's mention of Kriya of the Avelim. So let's turn to Daf Chavav. The Elu Kroim She'eno Misachim. These are the rips of Kriya that cannot be repaired. Number one, Akareya al Aviv v'al Imo. Number two, v'al Rabo Shalimdo Torah. Number three, al Adnasi. Number four, al Av Bezdin. Number five, v'al Shmuos Haros. We'll see exactly what Shmuos Haros are. V'al Birkas Hashem. And Chas v'Sholem, if somebody curses the name of God. V'al Sefer Torah Shenisraf, or if someone is present when a Sefer Torah was burned. V'al Ore Yehuda, over the ruins of the cities of Judea. V'al Migdash, and over the ruins of the Beis HaMikdash. V'al Yerushalayim, the ruins of Yerushalayim. In all these cases, Korin v'Eino Misachim, v'Korei al Migdash u'Mosif al Yerushalayim. One rips his garments over the ruins of the Migdash, and he extends that rip over the ruins of Yerushalayim. So he starts with a Kriya al Migdash, and then he expands it as a Kriya on Yerushalayim. Aviv v'imo v'rabo shalim dotor minalan. T'chsiv, it says with regard to the death of Eliyahu, when he went up to Shamayim in the Agalah, Elisha Roa, Elisha watches as his Rebbe Eliyahu climbs up. For whom mitzak avi rechev Yisrael uparashav. Elisha cries out, Father, Father, Israel's chariot and horsemen. What does it mean? Avi. Ze avi v'imo. Rechev Yisrael ufarashav. Ze rabo shalimdo Torah. My mashma, why do you derive this conclusion? Kinematagim Rav Yosef, like the Targum of Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef was a Saginor. In order to adhere to the prohibition against reading Torah Shebchsav Bal Peh, he would translate the words of the Torah into Aramaic Targum. Rebbe, the Tavla only Israel Bitzlo say, my teacher was more beneficial to Israel with his prayers, Mirasichin uparoshin, from chariots and horsemen. The Lomis Achim Minolan, how do we know that we're not allowed to repair the Kriya? T'chsiv vayachzek bibgadav vayikreim l'shnayim kroim. He took hold of his garments and rent them into two torn pieces. And this is a reference to Elisha when his Rebbe was taken away. Vayikreim, imashma shedemar vayikreim. It says that he ripped his garments. Eini odeh shel shnayim. I know that it was split into two. Why did the Torah have to spell out the Tanakh that it was torn into two pieces? El melamid shekruim bi'omdim l'shnayim li'olam. That they have to be separated, torn into two pieces forever, never to be repaired. So we learn that over the death of a father, a mother, or a Torah teacher, you can never repair the Kriya. Amalei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Eliyahu Chayu. Eliyahu is still alive. He ascended to heaven in a whirlwind, but he did not die. Why then did Elisha have to cut Kriya? Amalei Rabbi Yochanan responded, Kevan dechsiv v'lo ra'od. And Elisha never saw him anymore. Is the Gabi Didi Kimes Dami. As far as Elisha is concerned, Eliyahu was dead. Now that we see the Makar for the requirement to create a permanent Kriya in the case of the loss of a parent or a Torah teacher, now we go on to the other three laws in the Bryce and Nasi, the Avbezdin and Shmuas Rose, Minolan. How do we know that in those three cases, once again, he is not allowed to repair the garment after Kriya Dechsiv, Vayachazek, David Bibgadov. David took hold of his begadim, Vayikraim, and he ripped them. Vegam kol anoshim asher ito, and all the people who were with him ripped their garments. Vayas, vayispadu, vayifku, vayatsumu adaor. There was hesped, there was echi, there was tzom until the evening. Why? Because as a result of this loss of battle, Al Shol ve'al Yonasan beno ve'al Am Hashem ve'al Beis Yisrael ki naflu b'charev, Shaul and his son Yonasan had been killed, and the nation of Israel and on the house of Hashem, they had all fallen by the sword. Shaul's and Nasi. Shaul here is a reference or a hint, an allusion to the ruler of the nation. Yonasan's av Bezdin, because Yonasan sat on the Bezdin. Al Am Hashem ve'al Beis Yisrael, on the nation of Hashem, and over the house of Israel. Elu Shmuos Haros. Israel suffered terrible defeat in the battle, and Shaul died, and his sons were killed. Let me just see. No, I don't have that here. Okay. So the Gemara asks the following question: Omalei Rav Bar Shabal Rav Kahana, v'ema dahava kulu. Perhaps we should say that you're only chayav in kriya if all these things occur, the entire list. And Rav Kahana answers, Omalei, he says to Rav Bar Shaba, al hifsika inyan. It says, Al Am Yisrael, Al Am Hashem, the Al Beis Yisrael. Each word Al that is added creates a hefsek and separates one calamity from the other. So there's a chiv kriya even on one single calamity that's listed here in these psukim of Vayachzek, David, Bibgadov, etc. And the Gemara now is going to question whether, in fact, we're chayiv and kriya on a shmua ra'ah, and that's where we're going to end it for now. Thank you. Thank you very much.